Any student who is looking to master accessibility, this is the starting point because you are testing the application against certain standards. WCAG 2.2, single A and double A are the latest standards that we need to adhere to. The common mistake that students make is they call WCAG compliant. WCAG are standards, not the regulatory laws. ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, is a law. So you can say ADA compliant but WCAG conformant. There are 4 different principles. Then you have 13 guidelines, 86 success criteria, and 3 conformance levels. To begin with, we have 4 principles: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So what do you mean by perceivable? As a user, I must be able to see it, hear it, or feel it. See it means as a visual user like you and I, we can visually see the screen. Secondly, if I am dependent on a screen reader, I must be able to hear it using screen readers, be it JAWS, NVDA, or VoiceOver. Lastly, if a person is both deaf and blind, in that case, they should be able to feel it. And how they do it? Feeling the content using the refreshable keyboards, braille keyboards. So anything that is available on the page in the text format is something that the keyboard, which is refreshable keyboard, is able to understand and let the user know, okay, this is the content. Then we have operable. Operable means as a user, I must be able to interact with your application either using a mouse, keyboard, or a switch device. We use mouse every day, right? We don't even think about it. But what about a person who is dependent on keyboard only? A screen reader user is a very common example in which they are dependent on a keyboard, different combinations to interact with the web page. The last category is for people who have prosthetic arms or who have no sensation or movement in their hands. They are dependent on a switch device. You see this? There are 2 giant buttons. People who use prosthetic arms, they configure white button as tab key and orange button as the enter key. So there are different modes that you can configure. You can change the settings. You can have white button as spacebar press key, orange button as mute or unmute, depending upon what the end user wants it to perform. So this way they can configure the devices as per their needs. This is where it says your application must be operable either with mouse, keyboard, or any switch device. Then we have 3rd principle, which is understandable. As a user, I must be able to understand the application, and how we can do it? By using simple language on the page. The language of the page should be something that the 6th or 8th class or 8th grade student should be able to understand. So avoid using complex jargons, English that only Harvard students can understand. Avoid that. Provide consistency. If you are having your main menu in the top right corner on your home page, that should be consistent across the application. That location must not change. Error preventions. In case there are form fields or forms on your page, you should provide mechanisms to prevent errors in the first place. So if you have first name and last name, which are required field, but you have not used star to indicate it, and the user presses submit and the error displays, that's not error prevention. That's error suggestion. Error prevention is you're providing the information up from that first name and last name are required. Address line 2 is optional. Lastly, we have robust, the 4th principle. As a user, I must have the freedom to choose any user agent, which means any browser, any operating system of my choice. I can be a Windows operator or a Mac machine user. I should have the freedom to choose any screen reader of my choice. I can use either JAWS as a screen reader or NVDA or VoiceOver. That's the freedom that I must have as an end user. Moving on, we have defined there are 4 principles, then we have 13 guidelines. And let's see how these 13 guidelines are broken into different principles. So under perceivable, you have 4 guidelines, 29 success criteria. Under operable, we have 5 guidelines, 34 success criteria. Understandable has 3, 21 success criteria, and robust has only 1 guideline with 2 success criteria. Now, you are not required to learn or cram all of these by heart. Okay, this is just for your awareness how these are getting divided further. Guideline explains what you need to achieve. So, for example, if your goal is to lose 5 pounds in next 3 months, that is your guideline. This is my guideline. I want to lose 5 pounds. But how do you prove that you lost that 5 pounds? Those are called success criteria. Then we have conformance levels. Now there are 3 different conformance levels. Single A, which is the bare minimum. An application should always adhere to the bare minimum, which is single A. Then we have double A, which means the ideal support. And this is what most of the successful organizations go for. They go for WCAG 2.2, single A and double A. The pinnacle of conformance levels is triple A. Consider this, it's like climbing the Mount Everest. Not everybody cannot do it, right? So this is where all successful organizations such as Google, Microsoft, name any Fortune 500, they stick with single A and double A. With this, we enter the first principle, which is perceivable. We will be focusing only on single A and double A conformance levels. So any success criteria which is part of these two is something that we will be covering. Reason being, in the real world, when you are working on a real project, these are the only two that you will be focusing on. Okay. So the very first one that we have is non-text content. And before we even talk about this success criteria, I want to help you understand what this numbering means. Number 1 means your principal number, which principle we are talking about. This digit after dot means which guideline we are talking about. And the last third digit represents the actual success criteria that we will be talking about. So it's principle, guideline, and then success criteria number. So down the line, when you are taking examination for CPAC or WS, if there are questions related to non-text and they ask you which principle does it belong to, rather than learning or cramming everything, just look at the number. That's the trick to understand which criteria belongs to which principle and which guideline does it belong to. Then we have what is non-text content. All meaningful, important phrase to note here is all meaningful images and non-text content must have text alternatives, which covers your charts or diagrams on the page, any GIF or animation that you have used, any images or any icons that are meaningful. Meaningful images are those images that provide additional context to your screen reader users. Remember one thing, our objective is to provide equitable experience to our end users, not equal experience, right? It's not technically feasible to provide equal experience. So for example, if someone who cannot see, you cannot provide that experience to them. So what is equitable is providing all text to those images. So for example, I have a couple of images. If these images are adding meaning, so for example, I'm using them as part of my social media platforms like Instagram or YouTube, it is my responsibility to provide meaningful alt text because it is conveying some message. Similarly, if there is a complex infographic on the page, we must provide a link along with the alt text because there is a best practice in which your alt text should be less than 150 characters because there is something called as screen reader buffer. After a certain point, it stops announcing. And if you try to resume from where it ended, there is no way to resume the alt text. It will go to the next element on the page. So the best practice when it comes to alt text for images, limited to 150 characters. Now for complex infographics, it is not technically feasible to explain everything in 150 characters. In that case, you will say brief information about the image and then say more details available below the image. And below the image, provide this link which says more details on XYZ. It could be the name of the chart that you're talking about. And once the user clicks on this link, either open up a model which explains everything in the text format, or open up a page which explains everything again in the text format. Remember, our end goal is to provide alternate means to these images. And the other example that I have is for the buttons. In case you want to provide alternate text to this icon, you are required in case there is no text accompanying this button. And then I spoke about the GIF files or animations. So how do you meet this? We are required to provide alternate text for images, or you can use ARIA labels for icons. Similarly, if you have a synchronized media, which means you have audio and video files, you are required to provide captions for those. Are there any exceptions? Yes, there are exceptions. Images that are purely decorative. Decorative images are those that only provide or occupy space on the page, like a divider line between two paragraphs. Or there is a large image of a person holding a baby. That's just occupying the white space on your page. It's not adding context. Those are decorative images. Or if there are captchas on the page, if that captcha is having an alternative which says like announce the image within the captcha. Okay, so for example, there's a captcha which says play the audio file for the image itself, right? When you say I'm not a robot, that's one type of captcha. Then there's a captcha which says identify lamp post in this photograph, right? Underneath that captcha, there's an option to play the audio. If that option is provided, you can consider that as an exception while testing for non-text content success criteria. The next one we have is audio only and video only. In simple terms, if you're having a media file which is either audio only or video only, we must provide alternatives. So I have two buttons displayed within this media player. The very first one is the text description or text transcripts. The second one, AD, is audio descriptions. For audio only, we are required to provide a text transcript. Now, what is a text transcript? Text transcript consists everything that is part of the audio. Anything that I am speaking should be part of the text. Anything that you are speaking should be part of the text file. Because screen readers perform well when there is text provided on the page so that they can read it and now make the announcements for a screen reader user. For video only content, we are required either to provide a text transcript or an audio description. Audio description is when you are describing the scene to the end user. So for example, there is a video playing that a man is walking through the jungle. He's passing the bushes, he's passing the trees, and he's holding a hiking stick in his hand. That's what we need to include as part of the audio description. Because a person who is only listening, that provides additional context. Because if you don't provide it, it would be a blank or a silence for 2 or 3 seconds. Unless somebody starts speaking. So are there any exceptions? We do not have any exceptions for this success criteria. If you have audio only and video only file, it must have either of those things that we already discussed. The next one, we have captions. So captions must be provided for all pre-recorded audio content in synchronized media. Okay, you're not required to describe the scene to the end users, but only what is being announced as part of the audio should be part of the closed captions. Now there are two types of closed captions, open captions and closed captions. The one that we see on YouTube is an example of closed caption, wherein you have the control to toggle it on or off. That's why they are called closed captions. The other example is that you see on Instagram or TikTok. You see the text written within the video itself because those are burned within the video editing files. You cannot turn them off. Those are called open captions. Always strive to go for closed captions. If the technology allows, if platforms such as Instagram or TikTok do not have that feature, then go with open captions. Do we have any exceptions? We do not. There are no exceptions under caption success criteria. The next one that we have is information and relationship. What it means, in case we are having a web page, that web page should have meaningful and structure that is conveyed through semantics and not just presentation. What it means, Assume I have my dashboard as the main heading on the page. And instead of using the HTML tags or ARIA attributes, I'm using a span tag and using a fake heading class to make it look like a heading. But for a screen reader, it does not make any sense because they press H keyboard key H for heading to jump from one heading to another. But because we are using a span instead of the real H1 tag, it will not be identified. So the right solution is to use the right HTML heading tags. It will announce it as my dashboard heading level 1. That's what it means by structure. Like you and I, when you open up a new website, how do we scan a page? We look at the different headings on the page, right? Similarly, a screen reader user, when they open up a new web page, they scan the page by jumping from one heading to another. And they can only do when we have coded those elements as actual headings and not using CSS to make them look like a heading, but technically they are not. That's what information and relationship is all about. Secondly, when you have form elements on the page, you need to link this label with the input field because that's what you define a relationship between two elements on a page. And how do you do that? You use for attribute. Within the label, pass the ID of the input type using the for attribute. Okay, so this is how you define a relationship between a label and its associated input type. It could be your combo box, it could be your radio buttons. So you have to define that relation. Now there are different elements, there are different regions on the page. So you have headers, and within the headers you have navigation, which is the primary menu, which is mostly primary menu on the application. Then you have the main content of the page, followed by a side, which is complementary, right? If there is any additional information that you want to pass, usually used for quick links section on the page. And finally, you have footer section. Screen readers are dependent on these different landmarks or regions as well. If you are using JAWS, you will press R as in region, to jump from one region to another. Region is like header, nav tags, main, aside, footer, or role region if you're using ARIA attributes. So how do you meet it? Use semantic HTML tags first. If there is a heading, visually looking heading, always use H1 through H6. If there are list items on the page, be it unordered or ordered, use the actual list tags. Always link labels with your input fields. Do we have any exceptions? None, because as you can imagine, every element on the page must convey information and its relationship to the other elements on the page. The next we have is meaningful sequence. In its simplest form, it means that the reading order should be meaningful. Usually we go from top to bottom, left to right. Okay, so assuming everything on this page, I'm using down arrow key to read through the content. Okay, we will start from the logo, then we will go to home, about, social, and contact us menu items. Then we will go from box 1 through 4, followed by the footer links. That's a meaningful sequence. And how do you meet it? Or always choose HTML first, because screen readers read the content in the linear method. They are only dependent in the order in which the elements are getting rendered in the document object model or DOM. So whenever a page is loaded in your browser, it generates something called as DOM. And the order in which the elements are generated is the order in which it will be read out by a screen reader. If you use CSS to pull this element like contact us from right side to the left side using CSS only, screen reader will not change its reading order. It will still read your logo first, followed by home, about, social, and then contact us. So your reading order is always dependent upon in the order in which you have coded them. Again, there are no exceptions for this success criteria. Moving on, we have sensory characteristics. It means our content should not be dependent only on color, shape, sound, or location. So for example, rather than saying click on the blue button on the top left side, we should make sure that the button itself is self-explanatory, that it identifies as an actionable element. So look at this button. I have made use of multiple combinations. We are using text, we are using color, and we are using a shape. Because of these three different combinations, we are not dependent only on one sensory characteristics. Similarly, the save button, I have added additional icon within it. So it's providing you with text, icon, color, and shape. So this is what it means, that we are not dependent only on one of the sensory characteristics. So how do you meet it? Always make sure that there is a combination of multiple items. In terms of exceptions, as you can imagine, again, there are no exceptions for this. The next one we have is orientation. Its simple definition, it says content must not restrict view or operation to one screen orientation. So if you are having a page which works in the portrait mode, it should work in the landscape mode as well. Now there are exceptions, mostly when it comes to video games and editing softwares. The next one we have is identify input purpose. It's a very common whenever we go on and submit a new form or try to register on a new website. The moment you click on the first name, if you have autocomplete on in your browser settings, it will list out all your first names that you have entered using that browser, right? This is what identify input purpose is. That we should provide capabilities using autocomplete functionality to let the user select what he has already entered on a similar form. Some of the common elements that you should do it for are your first name, last name, address line 1, but not for sensory or important information, like nothing related to your banking information, your social security, your date of birth. Those should not have autocomplete. Anything else which is very common, which is not data sensitive, should be part of the identify input purpose. Then we have use of color. Color alone must not be used to convey the information. So I have an example. If you click on submit button without entering data, without entering your first name, I'm throwing an error which says, please provide your first name. Now imagine that you had multiple tabs open. You come back to this page and you are color blind. Will you be able to identify whether this is the error that was triggered by you or a helper message or helper text provided upfront? That's why never depend on color only. By accompany it with an icon. Now this is the global or the standard icons that we use. Anything which goes wrong, we show X, right? This is a good way to let your user know something went wrong. The other alternative would be to write error in front of please provide your first name. So it will say error : please provide your first name. Okay, so it's accompanied by text as well, even though the user is colorblind, but they can still read. So this is, in short, what is use of color. Similarly, for the chart that I have on the right side, if I'm providing these types of labels like blue represents Q1, yellow represents Q2, purple represents Q3, we are not dependent on color only. We are providing or supplementing it with text. So how do you meet it? Combine color with either text, symbol, or patterns. Now, patterns are commonly used when you have complex bar charts. There, you are not required to depend on color only. You cannot say blue represents Q1. Use patterns like different types of shapes, lines, circles. And again, there are no exceptions for use of color only. Then we have audio controls. If you happen to have audio only file that plays for more than 3 seconds, there must be a mechanism to pause it, stop it, or control the volume of it. And how do you meet it? Provide either a button or a link to ensure that the audio which is auto playing, you have the capability to stop it. Or by default on page load, do not autoplay the audio file. Even then you are covered. Are there any exceptions? Yes. If the audio file is under 3 seconds, you are not required to have it. If the audio is like a new message that comes to your Outlook and there is a subtle sound effect that is played, those are under exceptions because they are less than 3 seconds. But anything which is more than 3 seconds must have a mechanism to pause, stop, or you should be able to control the volume. Then we have contrast minimum. So if we have a text like sign up or first name, it should have 4.5:1 against the background. Okay, so the color contrast should be at 4.5:1. Okay, similarly, submit button, which is text on the blue button. White against the blue for text should be at 4.5 ratio 1. As you can see on the screen, we have please provide your first name, the error message. It's not readable even to you and me. That's where it is important to have sufficient color contrast. And this is the bare minimum. How do you meet it? For regular text, for normal text, it should be 4.5. For text that is large. Now, what is large? Either you're having 24 pixels font size or larger than that, or you're having 19 pixels and bold. That is also considered large. Okay. As long as you're meeting these requirements, you should be fine. And there are exceptions. In case we have elements which are in disabled form, like you have first name text box which is disabled, a button which is disabled, in that case you're not required to meet 4.5 ratio 1. Similarly, if there is a text within a logo, that text is not required to meet 4.5 ratio 1. Branding teams, PR teams, they ensure that their logo is highly contrast so that everyone can identify their logo. Resize text means you should be able to resize it up to 200%. And when you are at 200%, there should not be any loss of content or functionality. Okay. So if I zoom my browser at 200%, I should still be able to interact with the web page, read the content, and perform all the functionalities on the page. Why this is critical? Because there are users who use zoom softwares. They zoom into the page, people with low vision. They zoom into the application and then interact. This is where it is important to test for resize text. And how do you meet it? Use relative units. This is more important for developers. They might end up having hard-coded values for the container width or the font size, right? That's where always use relative units and avoid fixed layout. Always go with grid systems. And again, there are no exceptions under this. Then we have images of text. You might have seen images which are having text within it. Okay. For example, rather than using h1 tag for sign up, I'm having an image which has sign up within it. That's called images of text. Always refrain from using images of text if same thing can be achieved with the actual text. If you recall at the beginning of the session, I spoke about non-text content. We are required to provide alternate text. Why? Because screen readers are dependent on the actual text. If there is an opportunity to use actual text instead of images of text, always go for that. Exceptions are logos, absolutely, right? If it is essential content that cannot survive without the actual branding like logos, then yes, go with that. But anything else, if it can be achieved with the actual text, go for it. Then we have Reflow. You should be able to use the application if I zoom it up to 400%, because at 400% it will trigger the mobile view. At 200% it will still be the desktop view, but at 400 it will switch to the mobile view, and that's where it says or 320 CSS pixel width, because that triggers the mobile view. Use responsive designs, as I said, use grid layouts like flexbox or grids. Avoid horizontal scrolling at any cost. That's if you are finding horizontal scrolling in any application like mobile application, it's a clear violation. Okay, Reflow always ask about avoiding horizontal scrolling. And again, there are no exceptions in this case. The next one we have is non-text contrast. If you recall, recently we spoke about color contrast of text with the background. This is for the objects or visual elements. So your blue button with the white background should be at 3:1. Your hamburger with the yellow background should be at 3:1. How do you test it? We have softwares called as color contrast analyzers. Again, exceptions if the elements are purely decorative or if it is a logo. And if your logo is failing to meet 3:1, your designer has done a poor job of making it perceivable, right? Because logo is the very first thing that as a user you look at. Then we have text spacing. As an end user, if I'm always zooming into the application to read through, it is always overwhelming. What users have done, they have created their own CSS, which means they have set the styling to their needs. They have customized it. spacing between the paragraph at standard, they have set 10 times or 1.5 times. Rather than setting the default font, they have said 150% increase of the font size. When they do that, the text spacing should not break. It should still be readable and functionable. So how do you meet it? Use line height. This is more for developers, that they have to ensure that the line height is 1.5, the font size. Spacing after a paragraph is 2 times the font size. Letter spacing is 0.2 times the font size. I will show you how a real user actually does that. I have installed something called as stylus, and this is what real users do as well. Okay, now I have created a CSS. If I have to show it to you, I have created a base file for myself. So every time, rather than me zooming in by myself, I will come to this website. I'll click on this check mark. You saw that the moment I did that, it is changing the font. You look at the size. Let me try it on some other website. Let's go to Washington Health Plan Finder, sign in page. I'm going to go to stylus, click on base. The moment I did that, look at the font size. Everything is bigger in size now. Okay, this is how they can style their own CSS. Some people are having issues reading black content, right? That's where they can change it to yellow or darker blue or anything that's pleasant to their eyes. Do we have any exceptions? None. Text spacing must be supported. Then we have content on hover or focus. If there is a functionality, if I can hover over the menu and it has a sub menu, those should be actionable. And if they are triggered, they should stay persistent. It should not close without any action that I have taken. They should stay persistent. And if I mouse out, only then they should be dismissible. Okay. Same thing if I'm using my keyboard, if I'm tabbing, and if my focus is on the home menu, it should open up the product submenu. And if it is in the open state, unless I press escape key, it should not close. So it says dismissible, hoverable, and persistent. Everything should happen by the action that I am performing, not by itself. How do you meet it? Make sure that tooltips or pop-ups do not disappear too fast on their own. Everything should be keyboard accessible. And again, we do not have any exceptions for this.